Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Unknown Experts. We're going to quickly recap for you the latest UFC event, UFC London. Uh, if you've been following online with our social media accounts, I've been saying it for weeks. I even sent out a tweet to the man himself, Gamebred Masvidal, that he had this fight all but won. Till had the reach, but that Cuban boxing and his wrestling acumen, the fact that he's been brawling since he was doing it on the streets of Miami on the Kimbo Slice circuit, if you will. This was the veterans' fight, especially since we've seen such chinks in the armor of Till even before the Woodley fight. Woodley manhandled him, stunned him with a right, and then subbed him with a Darce choke. But even before that, the Wonder Boy fight, he comes in 7 pounds overweight, wins the decision mostly because he's in London, when you could make the argument that maybe he edged him out on points, but more likely it was just a very even match. Till was coming in very overrated, to the lone defeat being to Wonder Boy. I'm to Woodley, but you could argue that he lost the Wonder Boy fight prior to which. Either way, though, Masvidal comes in there. He weathers the storm. He keeps putting his back against the cage, so Till gives him opening so he can counter, and he does so beautifully, eventually pushing the pace on him against the cage, landing a counter left hook that he hadn't thrown in the fight up until that point, I believe, and then a stutter step and another left hook to finish the job. The first one stunned him, the second one put him out because you could see he was teetering already. And then things get really interesting while watching the post-fight show on ESPN Plus. I was lucky enough to catch the footage of him giving an interview, and then Leon Edwards, which you have to assume is a fellow Brit who got the W on the card. Also, we predicted that he would win, as well as Reyes and Nathaniel Wood, one of the most underrated bantamweights in the world, if not the UFC. Just to cover that while we're on it, we went 4-0 on the predictions we did make, so we're back in our prime form, folks. Anyhow, Masvidal's back there giving an interview. He hears someone mouthing off. He steps away from the interview, and then next thing you know he throws a 3-piece at Leon Edwards, who's in his face, and they're separated just as Edwards goes to throw a push kick, and he's grabbing the railing as people are pulling him, but Masvidal pieced him up. Apparently there's been pictures released of Leon with a couple cuts across his face just from the 3 or 4 punch combination that Jorge landed in that flurry there. So what is frightening, if I were Masvidal, is the push that could come of this. First and foremost, disciplinary issues, officially or unofficially. Unofficially being that they have him step down in competition now that he beat the guy who just lost to the former champion. So he should be fighting at least the number 5 or 6 guy next. Now, if there's an official issue taken with him by the UFC, since there's no commission overseas and they handle that all in-house, then he could either be suspended or he could be facing a lackluster, non-ranked opponent, or even worse, they could throw him towards Leon Edwards, who's not a top 10er on most people's list. That way they can settle in the cage, and they got that footage already, and they could run with it, try to make it a mini Conor Khabib thing, nowhere near on the same scale. But, honestly, there's only a couple fights that make sense between the 2 participants in the main event in London. Ironically, a lot of them have to do with the same person, Robbie Lawler. You could match up Till with Lawler coming off the very controversial loss to Ben Askren after manhandling him and then getting caught in a bulldog choke. And in case you don't know what our official stance on that, it's pretty simple. Whether or not Robbie was out isn't the question. It is a dangerous, dangerous position to have your neck wrenched in that fashion. Even if it's not underneath the chin, you can cause severe damage to the spine, to the head with that squeeze. And I'm sure you've heard Joe Rogan and many people say that even if you believe it was a choke, even then, it doesn't have to be underneath the chin. You can just grab a guy around the head on the jawline, and you can choke him out if you got the grip, if you got the squeeze, that is. So other than that, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, yes, some footage shows Robbie trying to give a thumbs up, but if he was really all there with it, he should have had the thumb right in front of the lock to give the thumbs up. And we love Robbie Lawler here. I mean, look at how well he took that defeat. I mean, as soon as he protested initially, and then he's like, "Oh, I understand." I mean, the ref was in there. Herb Dean, I've never been a big fan of until McCarthy retired, because McCarthy was kind of losing some of his shimmer. But Herb is now the new gold standard, especially when you have the opposite of which you had Mark Goddard starting to look very good as a ref, and now he's taking severe steps backwards, specifically in the the Carmel Usman and Tyron Woodley welterweight title match, where Usman's working against the cage, gets the takedown, and Goddard's telling them to fight. And how hard it is for a Division II and Division I wrestler to go at it like that, for that pace, and doing the grind against the cage. Usman gets the takedown, and Goddard's, in his head, they're not fighting. That's a whole other thing. You've heard tons of people go on, I won't even get into. It's just utter rubbish. But back to my initial point, if I can find it, is the obvious choice for Till or Masvidal next would be Lawler. Coming off a controversial loss like that, it would make sense either way. Till versus Lawler, great strikers matchup. Can Robbie deal with the reach just like Jorge did, even though Robbie's closer in reach than Jorge is? And then Jorge versus Robbie is just a great scrap match. They both have great boxing. They both have great wrestling. Either one's a winner there. Then on the flip side, Askren's no longer interested in the Till fight because he lost, but they could still make it happen. It'd still be entertaining to see if Askren surviving Robbie was a fluke, because Till comes in there, unless he's so psychologically bent from these past couple fights, he's going to put the fight on him in a boxing sense, and see if Till can get a hold of him before he gets banged up worse than he did against Lawler. The other matchup for Till, what was it? We had, let's see, I mean, you could make the argument he's got to take a step down in competition after losing to Woodley and Jorge. Jorge, who was unranked, and Woodley, who was the champ at the time. And like I said, Wonder Boy, I still don't think he won that fight, but you could do the Wonder Boy rematch, but no one's clamoring for that. Their styles clash in such a weird way. It's going to be the same result. We know from the Woodley fights that Wonder Boy doesn't go in there and change his styles in hopes of trying to get a quick finish, a la how Shogun Hua changed it up, or more recently, how Conor McGregor learned how to throw Muay Thai leg kicks against Nate Diaz in their second matchup. And his entire career, Conor had always used foot capoeira kicks. But yeah, so I would say Darren Till, Lawler could work. Jorge Lawler could work. Jorge versus someone higher up on the totem pole, because we know Kobe and Usman is all but official, so we have a welterweight title fight set in motion. So you got Rafael Dos Anjos, who's milling around there. Damian Maia's coming off a win. You got the bloody co-main, Leon Edwards, coming up over Gunnar Nelson there. And Edwards, even went to the ground with Gunnar and had top position, which is really impressive, since the only guy who's really been able to out-grapple Gunnar at welterweight's been Maia so far. And we know Maia's cutting down for middleweight. So you could always throw Leon Edwards' name in there as well. So you could do Jorge versus Edwards. There's all these possibilities of welterweight with these two guys, even though it was such a spectacular knockout. Till can rebound from it. It's just a matter if he can psychologically rebound. And in other news, we all know that McGregor is coming off of this weird Miami incident, which, like I said, was just kind of blown out of proportion. You got Conor grabbing some fan's phone, smashing it. then stupidly leaving the scene with it and being arrested in Miami-Dade, Florida for strong-arm robbery, for leaving the scene with the phone, which, I mean, who else was shocked that it had nothing to do with a narco charge when you saw that he got arrested? But I digress. Moving on the horizon, in the coming month, we have UFC 236, Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway 2. And the common misconception here is that Holloway won the first fight. Poirier caught him in an armbar. It may have been from an arm triangle, but there was definitely an arm lock in the sub. I'm pretty sure it was an armbar. But either way, even on JRE, they had just assumed that Holloway had won the previous fight because of the 11 fight win streak the Hawaiian's been on. Either way, I don't think that win helps Poirier's chances, especially with the new way Holloway goes about it, how he's just standing and picking his strikes. I think he picks Dustin apart. Poirier is fun to watch. I like him as a fighter, but he seems to keep escaping by the skin of his teeth with these wins. Like I think it was the first Gaethje matchup where he was on the ropes, so to speak. Like, you could tell that he was hurt, but Gaethje didn't catch on, and he was able to do. That was the fight with a couple fouls, and it was ruled in a disqualification. And then in the rematch, he was able to. Unless I'm confusing the fights here, in the rematch, it was a similar situation, but he was able to pull it out yet again. I mean, the first momentum he had caught at this weight class was immediately squashed by Bobby Green. And when was the last time you heard from Bobby Green? Other than that, the Anthony Pettis match, I mean, he won by putting Pettis in a leg triangle that busted Pettis's rib. I mean, that's why we were all so surprised when Pettis came back and gave Tony Ferguson such a hard time, but putting him out there. I mean, we thought this guy was done. The Wheatie box curse, if you will. Speaking of Ferguson, hopefully he finds the help he needs. I thought he was doing meth or something like that, because the facts were he'd been up for 3 days, his wife got a restraining order, he was looking for microchips around his house and listening devices. That sounds like cocaine or meth or even Adderall talk. But even just staying up for 3 days is enough. I can tell you from personal experience, I have mild psychosis and do things that you regret. But hopefully it's not concussion related, because it sounds very fucked up to keep pushing for the Khabib fight now that this guy's had this issue. The one guy who could probably beat Khabib pretty handily would have to go in there and risk getting further mental damage in doing so. Well, that is if he ended up on his back, which we know he would, but the question then is, does he sweep? Does he catch him coming in? All these things we've covered 100 times over. So hopefully Ferguson finds some solace, or it's solved in a fashion that has nothing to do with post-concussion syndrome or CTE of any form, and it's just like a one-off that the guy was up for a couple of days, started losing his shit. Simple as that. But back to the point at hand, the co-main event for UFC 236 is another interim title fight, just like the previous, this time between Israel Adesanya, the last style bender, who had a very impressive kung fu fight against Anderson Silva in his last outing at 234, where he won a unanimous decision, rightfully so, taking on Kelvin Gastelum. So this is going to be the first time we see Israel take on a world-class wrestler. Now the only questions going in is, will they both come in healthy, and will Kelvin make weight? So we'll have to wait and see on that. But we do know for a fact after 236 we will have 2 new interim champions. And lightweight, it'll still be a mess because of Khabib sitting out till November due to solidarity to his brothers, quote unquote, his friends who were suspended for the McGregor brawl, who are out until late October. So he's out until November willingly. His suspension is up next month. Then you have McGregor almost fighting Cowboy Cerrone, saying that he would. And then, according to Joe Rogan, someone was pitching the idea hard of it being a co-main event, which immediately made him walk away from the table. So now Cerrone's moving on to try to face somebody else. There's some name floating out around there. It escapes me. It doesn't pop, so it doesn't come to mind, to tell you the truth. And then Ferguson has the health issue. So your top three guys at the division are all tied up in something, whether it be health issues, solidarity of his teammates, or ego and running a whiskey company. But so hopefully Holloway or Poirier can start righting the ship of the division. And Holloway looks oversized. Same as the rest of these guys. They're all in their 20s. McGregor before him, and a couple of other guys. They all start at featherweight in their 20s. They can't make the weight cut anymore, or it's a bitch and a half, nearly killing them. And then they just progress up to lightweight. I predict we'll see this for quite some time. So expect Holloway, if he wins the fight, to continue fighting at lightweight. Goddamn air traffic and everything else interrupting this broadcast. We're going to post another episode real soon. Stay tuned to our page for more exclusive news, like the video we broke before ESPN posted it of the Edwards Masvidal brawl, as well as we're your first people to come to whenever the UFC One Championship or Bellator, hell, even Ryzen drops posters. Come to us. We'll have it on our page before anybody else. And stay tuned. This is Mike AsAlways signing off. Peace out.